What does a Ukrainian victory in the war look like? But taken not just militarily, but from the widest possible historical and cultural point of view. And that's really what I want to talk with you about, because I'm not a military expert. But I do, on this channel and on the main channel, have conversations with you about where you are historically, about what it means for you to put into historical context your dreams and your fears and your understandings of the world. So much of what I'm trying to do here with you is not tell you what you should think, but tell you what the stuff that you find inside yourself is assembled from, where it's come from, and where it might go. So, in a nutshell, this is what Ukraine's victory looks like in that kind of broad historical context. It's to fly the flag for democratization, just as West European countries are wobbling a bit at sustaining their democracies. You see, one of the things that we debated incessantly, and I'm just going to speak through this awful construction noise, is can Western values spread all around the world? When I was an undergraduate, now almost a quarter of a century ago, people were talking about whether Western values were universal. Francis Fukuyama's famous 1989 paper, The End of History, was only 10 years old then, which feels incredible. And so there was this question, will the world converge on a species-wide civilization that represents a kind of agreement on a certain model of democratic capitalism? And now we aren't even talking about that. We're talking, forget about the universalization of all of this stuff. Can the West even maintain its own share? And what does it need to do to maintain its own share? Because it's not that this stuff isn't spreading around the world. It's that it's receding in the West. And so a Ukraine victory is a victory that adds one more pillar in the world to the process of moving toward democracy rather than away from democracy. And it doesn't just add this sort of pillar of attack toward democratic progress, just as there is democratic regress in Western Europe. It also acts as a leader and catalyst for other democratization movements in Eastern Europe. And here we're getting not too far from one of the issues that the folks in the Kremlin, they're degenerates really now, but these folks in the Kremlin are worried about. And that's that if you did have resplendently attractive, democratic Ukraine that's stable, that's sound, that has its territorial integrity, or at least most of it, that is largely free of corruption. If you had that kind of Ukraine, a Ukraine that the world looked to, that would be very dangerous for anybody who wanted to avoid democratization in Russia. Russia is a more difficult country to democratize than Ukraine. There's no doubt about that. But a Kiev that's a democratic hub of East European culture is very powerful for Moscow. And so this is the other kind of victory for Ukraine, not just to be pulling the world a little bit toward democracy as much of the world is going away from it, but to pull East European countries, former Soviet bloc countries that are struggling, particularly Belarus, out of a dynamic where they can't sufficiently visualize themselves as European countries. Belarus has done a tremendous job actually visualizing itself as a European country in recent years. But Ukraine being that kind of catalyst could be very powerful. And it could also be powerful for Russia. It could really drag Russia over the line. And if you are a kind of neo-Tsarist ex-KGB officer, you don't want to think about that. So that's what that victory looks like, and it's hard. It's a harder victory than the military victory over Russia. And by military victory, we're not talking about Ukraine obliterating Russia's army. We're talking about Ukraine staving off an attack for sufficiently long and maintaining most of its territory. That's what a military victory looks like. But this is a difficult task, because it means for Ukraine galvanizing all of this really freshly born civic energy, that Ukrainians now think of themselves as Ukrainians in terms of citizens that belong to a state, citizens that are united across different other forms of belonging, across different values, across different cultural dispositions. So it's very much a civic form of belonging that Ukraine's experiencing in the middle of this war, and it's flourishing. But even when the war is over, that has got to be redirected to Ukraine becoming a global center of soft democratic power. And that's a difficult achievement. I think that's much harder than staving off the Russian attack, actually, as hard as that is, and as devastated as Ukraine is by what's happening. We've got death, we've got destruction, we've got an apocalyptic refugee crisis. But this is the aim for Ukraine, and it's a big task, compared with which winning the war militarily is easier. So we're going to have to see what happens. Most countries fail. Let's be absolutely clear about that. Most countries fail when they get their special historical opportunities, when they get their democratic opportunities. Certainly Russia has failed spectacularly in the recent democratic opportunities it got over the last 30 years. But it's now time for Ukrainians to start thinking about succeeding in this way. And even if you are under Russian bombs, one of the most motivating things that there can be is that you can become this kind of country, and that you can become this kind of global leader who doesn't just galvanize this new civic energy that's been born in Ukraine, but also doesn't let go to waste the extraordinary positive and freedom-loving energy that's generated toward Ukraine all around the world. So this is a little bit of what a real victory for Ukraine, I think, would look like.